Welcome back, everybody, to the Journey for Integral Recovery podcast. And this is episode 19. Can you believe it? And we're really, really happy to be here. And I'll just speak for myself. When I get to hang out with these two gentlemen and our guests, it's a high point of my week. I just love these guys.
Same here.
You know, we started out with friendship and then we developed into this thing. So thank the Lord, this friendship seems to be growing along with the work that we're doing together. And that's just super rewarding.
Absolutely,
so I'm John Dupuy, CEO of iWake Technologies. Wrote the book Integral Recovery, a revolutionary approach to treatment of alcoholism and addiction. It was the first, and I just somehow was at the first of the queue to write the book. But Guy Duplessis, who we've written brilliant books. Bob, you've written papers. Anyway, so we're all in this together, and anybody who wants to join with us is a pioneer, and anything we contribute, because we're inventing this as we go, okay? Because the whole model is made to keep evolving, getting deeper, richer, better, more effective, more beautiful. So your input, your participation, your questions, your comments, your building groups, or whatever, whatever your higher power or spirit or your vocational call is leading you to do, is part of this, and we'd love to support you in any way we can. Yes. So last week we started on, we've been galloping along trying to get the whole integral map delineated as it applies to a recovery and beyond recovery, which is the really exciting thing about integral recovery. It's not just about maintaining sobriety, which is a foundational part, but it's also about becoming your best, most brilliant, and most beautiful version of yourself, because that's the true authentic joy that you have, and that is the gift you have to gift the world and your people and all creatures, past, present, and those to come. So we started, I'll just go over the map really quickly. We start with the 4 quadrants. Aqua map stands for all quadrants, all lines, all levels, all stages, and all types. And we're just about to polish off the introductory part of types. And we got into some different typologies, but basically the one I talk about in my book, and the one that we use most of all, simply because I knew it best probably when I was writing the book, is Enneagram. But I think you'll see it's extremely powerful tool for understanding yourself, understanding your pathologies, your foibles, and your potentials, and your great gifts you have to the world, and not only yourself, but everyone that you're involved in the world. And it'll help you understand our current president and all kind of things. It's really revelatory. Just as when we start looking at stage development, we understand why we have a cultural war. While people, the same country, same background, blah, 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 look at each other and they can't even talk about anything besides, it's a nice day today. Yes, it is. That sort of stuff. Or they start just like going after each other. So anyway, learning the types it just changes everything. There's just a new depth and understanding what it means to be a human being and what it means to be you. So anyway, that's my opening statement. You guys want to follow up on that?
John, I think you're fantastic at being able to organize and inspire all this. I just sit here and smile as I listen to you. Thank you. I do have a thought. It's something that you said earlier about becoming our best selves. This week in my meditations, I read different recovery-oriented kind of inspirations in the morning before I meditate. And one that I came across this week that I wanted to share in that spirit that really helped open up. In the 12-step programs, we talk about our defects. This author was talking about our defects in a way that, so much of my work is around shame and around reducing shame, because as I understand it, shame stands directly in the way of effective recovery. And this author had the wisdom to look at defects from a slightly different perspective, because people can assimilate that right into a shame-based personality structure, and it's really problematic. And what this author said is that that defects end up being blockages in our access to our true self. Nice. And I love that spin. It's exactly what you were saying right now. You reminded me of it, and we can come to this later, but I really internalized that. And I went to a group that I attend, Refuge Recovery, yesterday, and shared this insight, and it landed well with those of us in the group as well, is that what a way to reframe our, like you mentioned, our foibles or our so-called flaws as simply blockages in the stream of the self. And what can I do to remove those so that I can more access my potential? So thank you, John, for reminding me of that.
And unrealized gifts that we have inside of us, and those vocations, those things we have to get to the world, what's our musicality, our writing, our teaching, our loving, our whatever it is, those are also, when we don't work with those and bring them into a form that we can share with others, those, I believe those are equally blockages to the true self, and will get in the way of our recovery and our becoming the best version of ourselves, our self-actualization, we said in humanistic psychology, and realization, as we talked about in transpersonal psychology.
Yes. Doug, how about you? How are you this morning?
Well, just delighted to be here again with my friends. It's hard to believe we're 19 weeks into this thing already, and I just continue to be rewarded on my own journey of growth and recovery by not only the conversations with you guys, but the things that are happening in our Facebook group and some of the emails that we get coming through the website. Just terribly grateful for everything that has come together to make this happen, and delighted to be here with you guys again today.
And then let me just, one of the, when we're integral, recovery practitioners, and one of the things we begin conversations is how's practice, right? Because, this thing is a practice. And I just want to share a little, before we get into the Enneagram types, or continue with it, a little inspirational thing that happened, big inspiration for me. This week, I've been traveling a lot, and when I travel, I almost every day I'm hitting a gym or I'm playing tennis with Pam, so we're getting a lot of exercise as we travel. But I've had this hang up with our local gym here. It's a little gym. It's got everything you need to, if you work hard, it's great. It's not a Gold's Gym. It's not 24-hour fitness or one of these things, but I've had this blockage. And so I'll drive 120-mile round trip to get to a bigger gym, which is so lame. Anyway, so I was meditating and kind of just scanning, what's up. And the voice said, get a workout partner. I went, oh yeah, man. I've been working out for 35 years probably. And I've always done it alone. I don't think I've ever had a workout partner. The lone, silent, heroic type. Anyway, you can add fill in the blank there. But so I went to the park where I walk my dog Lucy. There's right next to Teasdale. This has monkey, kid stuff, and I use it to practice pull-ups and chin-ups while Lucy goes and runs around and looks for mice. But anyway, so I found a baseball there, one of these T-ball, soft kind of practice balls, and it had Daly on it. There's a good friend of mine, Derek Daly, whom we worked with for years in therapeutic wilderness industry, and he's a part owner now of Legacy here in the county. And I said, Derek, and he was a top amateur baseball player, and his father won the World Series at this really top level amateur playing, and his brother did, and Derek said I had to win it just so they just get off my back. Now at Christmas dinner, I'm cool. I won a World Series too. So anyway, I said, man, he would be a great workout partner. So I called him on my phone right there and said, hey man, I'm looking for a workout partner. He said, let's do it. He was just right there ready. It had already been set up. So we're working out 3 times a week together, and we did it last week. It was so good, and just in our communication, great ideas and inspiration. And he's all sore, which is cool, and he's an athlete, and he gets his body, and some other projects have come out of that. So I'm just saying, sometimes you have to tweak. If it's not working for you, you have to go, what do I need to change here? And if in your meditation, I believe you check in, you begin to have that kind of wisdom voice access that'll let you know what your marching orders, both strategically and tactically, how to get things done. So I'm really excited. My body's feeling good because, when you work out with other people, sometimes just because of the ego being what it is, you might push yourself a little harder. So anyway,
you're publicly committed now, John. That's double accountability.
Hell yeah, man. I need so much accountability just everywhere, keep me on the path. So why don't we get into, I think we left off with maybe 5. Okay. So we're talking about the Enneagram. If you guys hadn't seen the program, it's recorded, go back and watch it. And, this is introductory, and we're going to get some of my good friends, Leslie Hirschberger, Google her. She's an expert, a colleague. We've worked together in this field over the years, and we'll have her on here at some point to really unpack this stuff. But just to give you this first taste. So it's a 9-point Enneagram, means 9-pointed geometrical symbol in Greek. So for those that speak Greek, you're in. So there's 9 basic points, okay? And then point number 1, and there's a lot of complexities. You have wings, you have different types within the points, and you go to different points when you're either ascending, getting your stuff together, or under stress. So there's a lot of complexity here, but we're just starting with the basic points. 1 is the perfectionist, 2 is the helper, 3 is the doer, 4 is the romantic poet, and 5 is the thinker. Okay, and we'll start off with 5. And Doug is a self-identified 5 with a 4 wing. He's a romantically poetic thinker.
Beautiful.
Not all bad.
5 with 4 wing. They call it the iconoclast, as it were.
Oh, good to hear that. That's great.
Oh, good. And 5 is, Ken Wilber, the guy that kind of gave us the basic structure we're always talking about, the world-class 5. And he used to joke he was this big fat head with this little string called the body. And anyway, then he started working out, and he, when I first saw him, his the body like a Greek god. It's beautiful, but he understood that. But the pathology of the 5, and we'll talk about the gifts too, is a dissociative thing. You go into your mind, everything's analyzed, you live in the world of thought, and you're kind of dead from the neck down. And 5s can often meditate, and they get all dissociated, and they think they're enlightened. No, you're just dissociated, because meditation is not excluding reality, but it helps us deeply connect with all things, including our own selves and our own bodies and our own issues. So yeah, Doug, tell us about it. What was it like being a young 5 going through your journey, and what's it like now?
Well, I guess I wanted to start by mentioning something that or commenting on something, John, that you mentioned earlier, which is that our Enneagram types show us the work that we need to do, and our particular issues that we're facing, and thus our path towards transformation and recovery is very much influenced by all this. Being a 5, I am very introverted also, and always have been. I'm comfortable in the world of my head, and the tendency has always just been to think and desire to know and understand everything. It has always caused me to just explore and investigate and observe. And when I get an idea in my mind, I have to go learn everything about it. So I discovered integral theory, and it was, all right, I need more. I need to study deeper. I need to read books and just immerse myself in it completely, which when it comes to integral, of course, is not a bad thing. It's an enlightening journey. But the challenge is you can get stuck there and disidentify with the other parts of you, with your heart and your body, as it were. I would tend to get lost in my head when I was deep in my addiction, thinking about all these things, and the pessimism, the depression would just overwhelm me. I couldn't see a way out of the challenge, and I kept trying to think my way out of it, when, as they say in 12-step parlance, I had to learn to act my way to better thinking. And while discovering better ideas was certainly helpful in my own journey of recovery, it was only part of the picture. The thing that made the biggest difference for me, and continues to make the biggest difference for me, was learning how to get into my body. My fitness really opened a lot of doors and got me out of my head and into my body. I'll tell a couple of different stories here. One is fitness is what started it all. I began by walking. First of all, I was very reclusive in the depths of my addiction, and I can get into this more when I tell my story in full in some future episode. But I was essentially an agoraphobic. I didn't go out of the house at all. I didn't drink or use in public. It was, in order not to make a fool of myself, I was alone. And, staying that way, I got to the point where I was scared to even go out the door. So I started by just taking a walk around the block, and I resolved to do it every day. And that was it. I just had to step outside the house and walk around the block once. And in doing so, I got outside and I saw my neighbors and started to learn that the world wasn't out to get me. Moving my body in that way did
Doug,
a lot.
how old were you when more or less when this was going on?
So I started using pretty young. Things got really bad when I was 21, 22, and continued into very early 30s. So this is that period. I'm probably age 28 around here. Yeah. So the exposure to the sunshine and the moving of my body, it's amazing how good exercise makes you feel. Just getting out and moving around a little bit. The pleasurable neurochemicals that you get from substance use can really come through in exercise in a beneficial way that your body loves. And learning how to do that was incredible. You know, from there it ballooned into starting to strength train and get into yoga and do some other things. And my practice these days is pretty robust, but I start my morning every day with a workout. And when I miss that for whatever reason, man, do I feel it. It makes all the difference in the world to me. And coupled with meditation is a very solid foundation for practice and my continued growth and recovery. But it was learning how to include that in myself and what I needed to do that was important.
And I might add that, Doug, you're also a husband and a father and working, and you have every good excuse in the world to be too busy to do all this stuff, and yet you found a way to do it.
Yeah, my my wife says she is just amazed by my willpower, because I'm up at 5:30 or 6 a.m. every single day to get that workout in before the world intrudes, and it becomes a great way to start the day. Something else here is the heart, and this is connected with the body. I spent some time as an actor as well. This is another interesting part of my recovery, but when I got into the acting world, I signed up for a class in the Strasberg method and belonged to a beautiful actor studio there in Atlanta that was focused on Strasberg method. And Strasberg acting, for those who are not familiar, is very centered on expression through the body and learning to feel things in the body. So you lead not from a place of thinking about the script and thinking about the lines, but rather identifying things in your body and then acting through them. And in the exercises, I was not only accountable to a group of people who were doing something I love and got me into a social circle and started to make me feel better about myself, raise my self-esteem, and transcend some of that shame that I had felt for so long. But also I learned how to identify these things in my body and how to feel through them and release them. That, combined with the exercise program, was exactly what, as a 5, I needed. Those things got me out of my head and made all the difference in the world.
I just say it's very moving to hear what you're saying, then, because, I've known you, I don't know, we've known each other for 6 months or something. It hasn't been that long, but when I met you and the first time we started communicating, Skyping, it's like, as an older guy, it's like, when I see a younger guy, and, with the quality of your heart, your soul, and your mind, it's like, man, there's hope in the world. Things are, are getting better, because look what's coming up, and to hear that you kind of the depth of your suffering and your isolation, and the person that we know today. And of course you have that pain too. I can see that, a teacher of mine once said, you have good pain. I can see it in your eyes that you're not just an ingenue. I mean, you've dealt with your demons and you struggled with the darkness, and it gives you a presence and a wisdom and something that otherwise we don't get. So anyway, it's quite moving to hear your story, and I hear it and then I compare to what I've known, and it's just remarkable. It's really grateful for you.
Yeah. Thank you, Doug. It's wonderful to hear your story. I look forward to hearing more, but this is very touching as well. I've joined John in that. Yeah, I really appreciate it.
And thank you, guys. John, dealt with my demons it's an ongoing practice. It always is.
Absolutely.
I feel very fortunate now to have a toolkit that helps me get through it. When things come up, they're no longer so all encompassing. And I have the tools now to work with to continue to move through it. So it's always an ongoing practice, and we go and we correct and we keep working at it, and every day is a little bit better, and then some are a little bit worse, and you do the practices and they start to get better again.
And one of the gifts that healthy 5 has, they're sages. It's like they have this, like Ken, it's just stuff, it's just amazing. And he chose not to be a leader, not to be a guru, he's a sage, and we go to him and we take his stuff, and you have that same quality, it's like every time we talk, well, I read this book and we put this stuff together, and it's like, thank God, we've got this guy that is, so smart, and, being smart's not bad. being smart's a really good thing, and the human brain, the intellect, is a great, amazing miracle of the universe. It's just when it becomes associated in isolation without the other essential parts that it gets unbalanced, like everything else. So there's a beauty. And in fact, I wanted to plug this book here. My favorite books, I've given it away so many times. It's The Wisdom of the Enneagram by Hudson and Rizzo. And I think Rizzo just died a couple of years ago, but it's a fantastic book. Yeah. And one of the nice things it has in it, among many things, it has a scale as what is it like to be a unhealthy 5, what is it average, to really high functioning. And so you can read that and go, oh yeah, that's me about 6 o'clock in the morning. and then this is me when I'm really, in the zone and doing really well and giving my gifts and, just in that place. And this is the work that I have to do. So, all of these things have their, like you said, Doug, it shows you what needs to be done, and it shows you, the potential. And we were talking about, one of the things, and maybe I'm just, going off another tangent, but why not, is that often I've noticed with spiritual teachers that when they're talking about the higher stages of development or enlightenment, all they're really talking about is the really positive aspects of their particular Enneagram point. So a 7 spiritual teacher would talk about, you're never bored, you can laugh a lot, it's fun, you're lighter, this and that and the other. And like, well, that's true. And the 6 would talk about, which we'll get to next, which is me, talk about faith and, overcoming fear and, and knowing everything is essentially okay, no matter what. And so we tend to project our stuff. And if we're working with people as coaches or therapists or something, or groups, we tend to, well, this worked for me and everybody will be the same way. Well, it's not that cookie cutter, different people are working on different issues. And some people don't. It's like, you really need to read, Doug. No, I think he's really got the reading thing. He's not a reader, writing books. So, so you can't project all that. But when you look at all of the virtues that come out of all the points, then you have something that I think we can all aspire to. And I think at the higher levels of development, we begin to take on those positive aspects of all the points. So that's a really interesting story that we were discussing the other day.
John, let me dive in. I want to respond to that just real briefly here, is that my initial exposure to typologies was in the mid-'80s when I finally delved into Jungian typology. And we may discuss this a bit more at some point. But whether it's the Enneagram or Jung's personality types or any other kind of cartography, I know that for me, one of the most powerful experiences I had with this, it was really one of these eye-opening epiphanies for me, was it opened the doors for me to be empathic or compassionate for people that are different than I am. And also, and I think this is actually more significant to me at that point, it allowed me to be compassionate for myself, because owing to this and that reason, I found myself in a graduate school, I found myself in a religion, I found myself in a marriage. I had been born into a family in which my particular type from a Jungian perspective was really marginalized and even shamed. And I had internalized that. And so to read a system, and I think the Enneagram does this par excellence, which allows me to have empathy and compassion for myself as a beginning, and then to extend that to others is really extraordinary. I'll tell you a practical application of this is that I think this reading, this delving in for me, in the mid-'80s was significant in leading to my leaving my marriage at that point. And it opened my eyes to what had happened, what was going on, and it seemed fairly intractable, even after years of therapy. But I have this to say, is that I left my marriage, and it's continued to be this way all these years. The mother of my daughter, I've always maintained compassion for her. We didn't have an acrimonious separation and divorce, and I think it was really a function of understanding typology. So there's some real cash value to internalizing what we're talking about. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Bob.
Yeah.
So perhaps we should move on to the next point. I have this compulsion to get through this. Me.
John,
no, but to get to you. No, to try to get to 9 before we finish this particular thing, and we can do it. We don't have to rush this thing. But the next point is a 6, which I am. And 6 is about fear. That's the main thing. That's the major issue that it's not one of the deadly sins, by the way. I think all the other ones are they have their deadly sin thing, but just being afraid is not necessarily a sin in the classic Christian labeling of our different weaknesses. But it is about fear, and there's two basic types, and there's other more delineated types of sixes, but is the counterphobic and the phobic. And they're both dealing with the same thing, but they're different strategies. The phobic is just the one that's scared. Doesn't want to go out in the street, wants to wash his hands all the time. It can become that kind of obsessive compulsive disorder. The world's scared, they're like kind of rabbits, always scanning for predators. And there's just a lot of fear based there. The counterphobic is the one who does everything to be a badass and goes against the fear. In the extreme things, they have bunkers out in the boonies in North Dakota filled with 50 caliber ammunition and guns and survival because the end is coming and woe is us and all this stuff. But I wasn't quite, the bunker type, but I've been working out for 35 years. I'm a martial artist. I was a military policeman, a soldier, a wilderness guide, all these kind of strong, macho, be ready types. And it wasn't until I started meditating, it was like, I can take care of myself. I know guns, I know martial arts, I know blah, 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 blah. I'm not afraid. And then I started meditating. It's like, holy, Kim Wilber said in his book recently, he had this phrase, numb to numbness. You're so numb, you don't even know you're numb. And I got through that numbness and I got into it and I was like, holy cow, I'm scared of everything. I am terrified. I'm scared of living. I'm scared of dying. I'm scared of success. I'm scared of failure. I'm scared of being alone. I'm scared of being in a relationship, just on and on. Oh my God, I'm a mess. So all of my strategies and what I was doing started becoming conscious, and I'm still that way. I go into a restaurant, I immediately scan for threats. I want to get a table where I can check out everything and I know where the exits are. Yeah. And if it comes down to it, I think I can use this breadstick as a weapon, So, that's, and a lot of times I'm not even thinking about it, it's just, here I go again, here's my little unconscious sixth thing playing out. And, also we tend to be defenders, that's one of the virtues. We want to defend people. And we can be very anti-authoritarian, or we can really suck up to authority, depending what strategy we have. And of course, it's about becoming comfortable with your own inner authority, that you stop, always being in opposition to anybody in authority, because, it's a projection. Quite. And that is one of the defense mechanisms, main defense mechanisms of six. We project our fear and stuff on other people. So you have to re-own that, find your own authority and find out what's good about it. It's called a loyalist. We're very loyal. We're troopers. We can work really hard and endure stuff for noble causes and stuff like that. That's why you find sixes are all in the military and firemen and policemen. And we're really attracted to these kind of things because we can actually confront fear and we can do something about it. So
thank you.
Maybe snuff said about that. Yeah. And now this is the fun part, because basically 7 is the point that has the most fun.
John, before we dive into 7.
Before we dive into you, let's take another whack at me.
Yeah, I've always loved this, knowing you. As you were talking, I've known you for 5 years now and loved you for all this time. And you're using the term loyalist right now. I experience so deeply your loyalty to our friendship, your loyalty to this work, to getting the word out, your loyalty to your own integrity. It so perfectly describes my experience of you, John. I just had to name that. That is just spot on and about you in that, John. Really deep love for you, you loyalist, you.
Okay, well, thank you. I love you too, Bob. Thanks a lot. I appreciate that. And moving right along is a 7.
Did I just show that I'm a 7?
No, you showed that you're a beautiful, sweet man. That's what you showed. No, and 7 is the epicure, the hedonist kind of. It's all about having fun, and there's levels to this. And an unhealthy 7 will be, the bumblebee, flower to flower, or the Eagle song, The New Kid in Town. When you're a new kid in town, oh, you're cool. Then, you start experiencing you as a messed up human being like the rest of us. We need to go over here and do this. And so it's all about experience and fun and excitement. And the world is so interesting. And, drugs can be a part of that. And what it is at the pathological level, it's avoidance of depth and the hurt. So you stay having a good time so you don't have to deal with the pain. And that's, I'm sure that's true for all of us on some level, but it's really very expressed in the 7. And of course, the path through that is to accept the pain and go into the darkness. And when you do that work as a 7 and you come out the other end as a healthy 7, oh my God, what a beauty they are to behold, because there is a true love of life and the world, and they can, and you can, while we're trumping along in our loyalist thing, you can say, hey, look around you, brother. It is really beautiful. Oh yeah, thanks. So there's this connoisseur of the beauty and the wondrousness that makes actually doing all the work and the sacrifice to get well actually worth it, because it's a really beautiful story. It's also a dark story, but there's great, insane beauty, amazing beauty. But you have to take the dark and the light together to become this realized being for all of us. But it's particularly pronounced in the 7 in that struggle. So what would you say about that, Dr. Bob?
I love your introduction. There's 3 stories I want to tell. I'll be brief with all 3 of them. They all came out of what you were saying. The first story is in the fall of 1979. I started graduate school. It was a 6-year doctoral program. I started off, and of all things, I was going to a Christian seminary to begin my graduate studies in psychology. And my first job was sweeping the floors of the student housing. And I may have mentioned this before. It's one of my favorite jobs ever because it gave me time to reflect hours and hours a week, doing nothing but sweeping and reflecting. And it was during those reflections that I came up with this, is that though I had just begun my studies in a conservative Christian seminary, I remember resolving as I swept the floors that I will no longer believe in anything, including God, outside of my own direct experience. And so I wrote a paper. It was called Trek. I can still remember it as clear as a bell. I wrote a paper that fall. I submitted it to my professor, and the paper was failed, and his response was, "I'm praying for you," but I didn't feel like a supportive "I'm praying for you." It's like, holy cow, man, we gotta get you back on board.
Yeah, that's kind of a Christian way of saying you're really fucked up.
Yeah, yes, yeah. And I took it that way, and I was really pissed off. But I want to name that, John, because as you were talking about experience, that gives you a peer into my own spirituality, is that since then I'm very disinclined to talk about believing anything unless it's rooted in my experience. Now, the truth is there's a lot that's rooted in my experience that gives me a lot of compatibility with Christianity, particularly more mystical forms of Christianity, certainly with Buddhism and Hinduism, Sufism, etc. But I've really, that's a lot of years ago. That's almost 40 years ago. I've really maintained that. I'm disinclined to assent to a belief for the sake of saying that I belong. That's not what I do. So that would be the 7 in terms of rooted in experience. A little bit later in that the next decade, towards the late 1980s, I went to a conference in Washington, D.C., and the speaker was Jean Shimoda Bolen. She's a Jungian analyst from San Francisco. You may know her. She had written 2 books. One that had gotten a fair bit of praise was God's in Every Woman. But the book that she was speaking on at this conference, and I had purchased it and read it before I came to the conference, was God's in Every Man. And what Jean Shimoda Bolen did in this book was describe the various gods, Zeus, Apollo, Hades, Dionysus. And I read these, and then I went to the conference, and that was another one of these markers for me, John, is that, and Doug, when I read the chapter on Dionysus, it was like, how could she know me down to just word for word description of my psyche? I mean, it was just uncanny. I actually, when I got early in recovery, I repurchased the book. I had long since given it away, read that chapter, and it still resonated. This is like 25 years later. And it's enough to say that Dionysus might well be understood as the archetype or the Greek god that is most related to the 7. And so the good news of that is that when I drum like a Dionysian.
You do.
And when I love like a Dionysian. The shadow side of it is the third story, and this is really what you said earlier, John, is that unfortunately, I thought that was sufficient. And so I can date this in the late 80s, early 1990s, very identified with Dionysus. It manifested in my work, in my play, in my relationships. But what I had done, and I even knew this theoretically, John. I learned this from John Wellwood in the early 1980s, this idea of spiritual bypassing. I knew better than this. And it wasn't that I was in therapy. I was in therapy and supervision, but there were levels of work that I had not done. And my Dionysian/7 fixation led me to bypass those. And those came back in a major way, beginning in the late 1990s into the 2000s, manifesting as increasing addiction. And ironically, it's not surprising to a 7. Addiction is just a perfect hand-in-glove fit for a 7.
for an unhealthy 7, yeah.
For an unhealthy 7.
Yeah.
I still remember, I'll finish with the story for now. I still remember the first time that I took ecstasy, going in to see my therapist that I'd worked with for a number of years, a Jungian analyst, coming in 2 days later. That was on a Saturday night. I came in on Monday morning for my therapy, and I told them, I was always transparent. I said, this is what I did. And I said, it was an odd thing, Don, is that when I was at this party, people kept coming up to me and saying, dude, are you as fucked up as I am? And I didn't have anything to say that. I was kind of startled by that. And what I told Don, which was true, was that I had never felt more like myself ever than on ecstasy. And so the idea of saying I'm fucked up, it felt like I was fucked in. I mean, I just felt completely myself. And I guess what you'd say is that would be the apex of like 7 identification, just maxing it out there neurochemically through a substance like ecstasy. Notice the name of the substance. Yeah. And with that was the shadow side of all that the ecstasy was bypassing. And so my thorn in the flesh, Don, John and Doug, my entire life, my thorn in the flesh of this 7 is my bypassing and needing to do the shadow work. Right. That's happened of necessity in the last 10 years of recovery. It just hadn't happened adequately. And it will be the rest of my life, and it will be a vulnerability the rest of my life, because I incline towards ecstasis big time.
Yeah. And it's interesting because shadow work is like, oh, I'm done with my shadow. No, you're not. But, and at a certain point in the practice, you start not only dealing with your own shadow, you start dealing with collective shadow and suffering and pain and repression and all of this stuff. But also the good side of the story is that I think ecstasy or ecstasis is part of our birthright. We just have to learn how to do it in ways that aren't harmful and self-destructive. Right. And I've played with you, I think 3 times.
Yes.
Bob's a great jazz drummer. And I'm a kind of ecstatic guitar player too, but he draws me into that energy. We start playing together and we get just high as kites. It's like, are they going to break in the door and bust us? Because we're having so much ecstasy. And there's a funny story. Went to a conference, and an integral conference, and Bob brought some percussive stuff, and I brought a little amplifier and my electric guitar, and we hooked up with this fantastic jazz trumpetist. And we were living like in the dorm rooms at this university where the conference was summer. The kids weren't there, students weren't there, and so people would go and having party and everything. And so we're in there playing, and these 3 women walk in, and they're beautiful women. One of them's this beautiful Estonian doctor, and Bob goes, John, you want to do heroin? And because the night before we'd done this song by Lou Reed called Heroin, which is one of the best inside, experiential things of what it's like to be a heroin addict that I've ever done. And I was playing that to another friend of mine in recovery, and I said, is it appropriate to sing this song? And I started weeping. I literally started sobbing. And he said, oh yes, oh yes. So anyway, Bob said, you want to do heroin? I said, Bob, we did heroin last night, and then he went, but it was so good. And these women go, oh, okay, And then later on, I tracked at least a doctor down. I knew her. I said, we were talking about a song we'd done the night before. I know that sounded terrible. And she was saying, oh, well, I just know you guys are rock stars, and that's how you. I'm doing her as the former governor of California. But anyway, she didn't talk like that. But I just figured you guys do that. I said, no. So anyway, so the 2 integral recovery guys were having fun doing heroin. Anyway,
Bob, what you said a moment ago about feeling more like yourself than you ever had, it occurs to me light bulbs are turning on here, and hopefully for our listeners too, that was a huge part of the appeal of alcohol in particular, but using in general for me, is that it was a way to finally shut this thing off get out of my, and just be for a while. I could finally stop overthinking everything and just be. And recently, you guys both know this pretty well, John and Bob, that I have really been exploring flow states and ecstasis and all this kind of stuff too. And that is about the same thing. It's learning how to get into a healthy version of that transient hypofrontality, to shut it down and just be with the larger self, being myself more than I ever have in a different way. It's not this overthinking ego self, but rather getting into the larger self is the goal of all of these practices, not only the exercise and meditation, but the creative practices, writing and playing music and everything.
Yeah, well, and your brilliant mind becomes your servant instead of your slave master. You know, there's just a different relationship to it, and we all bring the different gifts of, you know, our points into fruition as we continue to work on ourselves, and kind of the avoiding the pain, shallow, you know, bumblebee going from flower to flower becomes a person of incredible depth and beauty. You know, it's because it's balanced with the recognition of the pain and the suffering, and that turns into, of course, into compassion, and you can't spiritual bypass. And drug addiction and drug use and abuse and so many other kind of addictive things is really, it's a spiritual bypass. You wouldn't do anything but feel the pain and the hurt and the loneliness and the terror and the sorrow. So, well, thank you very much, Bob. And I want to get on. How are we doing on time, Doug?
We're about there. So I think we'll have to make this a three-parter.
For all you eights out there, and I'll give you a little hint. There's somebody that's in the news a lot who tweets constantly who is an 8, okay? And he has an affinity to red complexion and kind of, anyway, you know what I'm talking about. So we can't do it now. And however, I think we're going to have to come back to this subject. But our next show, we're going to be interviewing Dr. Adam Gorman, who is a friend, a colleague, and has been one of the real pioneers of the integral recovery wave or development or evolutionary plan or whatever this thing is that's coming out. So we're really looking forward to that. So anyways, again, you guys, it's been a real a joy.
Yes, Doug.
Both
yes,
happy,
John.
Funny, and very deep and moving. And anyway, we love you guys. We love you guys that are part of the Facebook group and the emails, and just, let's just do this thing together, shall we?
All right, great.
God bless.